are some of the headlines we are featuring today from your favorite news outlets at offthepress.com. The third indictment of former President Donald Trump could be coming this week, now that he's revealed that he is a target of the January 6 Capitol riot investigation. This one, if it brings a conviction on insurrection charges, could block him from taking office again. Still, polls show Trump is as popular as ever. On the border, illegal crossings dropped a bit, but remain at historic levels. But maybe the Biden administration is playing numbers games, because they let 500,000 migrants in under a new parole program. After 30 years, Las Vegas police are zeroing in on a suspect they believe might have been involved in the shooting death of rapper Tupac Shakur. And country star Jason Aldean has done it again. He's making liberals nuts with his latest song about real America. Try that in a small town. For stories like these and more updates all day long from your favorite news outlets, go to offthepress.com.
America's Voice Live, America's fastest growing news program. With Steve Gruber.
You've got to put America first. You do that by voting and bringing your friends to do the same.
Delivering the latest news, observations, and opinions. With the entire Real America's Voice team, America's Voice Live starts now.
Welcome to America's Voice Live. I'm Steve Gruber. Today, Wednesday, July the 19th, let's get to the day's top stories, and thank you for being here. The House Oversight Committee hearing from two IRS whistleblowers as we speak who allege the government's investigation into President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was mishandled. The hearing started at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be keeping an eye on it with live updates and some juicy sound bites, too. Also, in a big win for free speech, a federal judge handed down Biden's Ministry of Truth and a big defeat. Thank God for common sense in America. And then later, Loyola University, despite being a Catholic institution, has a class that teaches about the pros and cons of transgender medical operations on children. Campus Reform correspondent Matthew McKenna will join me to discuss that coming up. We'll get to all that. Now, we learned yesterday that Special Prosecutor Jack Smith is going to be rolling out more charges in the ongoing and really permanent investigation of Donald Trump. This time, Trump announced that he has been notified that he's the target of a grand jury investigation focused on January the 6th. You know, the first unarmed, uncoordinated insurrection in world history, where people who were let into the Capitol and took selfies of themselves have been prosecuted beyond the full extent of the law. Nothing says justice quite like throwing grandma into jail for walking into the Capitol, doing no damage, showing no signs of violence, and then leaving without actually committing a crime, while Team Biden can collect millions, 17 million and counting, in shady deals to let foreign countries buy influence through Hunter Biden and, it appears, Joe Biden directly, and have no consequences at all. What's the big deal? Yeah, this all makes perfect sense, not to mention the shortest line in the White House is made of Bolivian cocaine. But the Secret Service has no interest at all in investigating that little white lie, now do they? Anyway, let's focus on the relentless pursuit of Donald Trump for a moment. Both the weaponized Department of Justice and most of the major news operations in America are doing it. Neil Cavuto really doesn't like Donald Trump, and Vivek Ramaswamy doesn't seem to care about that. Here's what he had to say when they talked back and forth. Listen.
I do not think it should disqualify him legally from running. I think it should affect the decisions that voters make at the ballot box, because that's how we do things in the United States of America. The people of this country decide who leads them through a democratic process in our constitutional republic. So should voters take into account when deciding? Absolutely. And I'm making my case in the same election that Trump is, and I intend to win, Neil. But I want to win by convincing voters of why they should vote for me, not by having the federal police state eliminate my competition. That's why I stand on principle, and I say the same thing today that I have at every step of the way. You know what? Right after January 6th, I published it in the Wall Street Journal, making the case that censorship was responsible for what happened. 3 advisors to my company resigned. So yes, it has been at considerable personal risk too, Neil, that these are touchy subjects, but I believe it is important
but you've
to
also
speak
been
the truth
on
without
record,
apology.
Vivek, you've also been on record as saying that you would pardon the president should he assume or you assume office. Do you still stand by that? Because
I would,
there are a lot
because
of
I think
people who do not like what went down and don't think you're in a position should become president to go ahead and pardon him.
I don't like what went down, Neil, but what I really care about is moving our country forward.
You know, I'm old enough to remember when Fox News and Neil Cavuto at least appeared to be impartial. Yeah, that does make me a bit old, doesn't it? Anyway, do facts matter in this country anymore? You have to wonder if facts didn't matter for more than 2 years during the COVID pandemic, or with the southern border, or with the economy. No, just keep gaslighting and repeating the same lies over and over again, and soon the people will just get overloaded. Accept all that BS or just walk away throwing their hands in the air, or maybe both. I won't, but I think millions are already in that mindset. But here on this program, and for me, facts do matter, and they're going to matter going forward. So let me remind you of something on the way to the next round of politically motivated charges against the former president. Remember what Donald Trump said on January 6th? Do you remember what he actually said? It seems nobody on the left can remember. They can't seem to find this clip in their archives. But he said, be peaceful. He said, go home. Listen.
I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
Go home in peace. Go home in peace. Did he have grievances? Of course he did. But he certainly was not calling for an insurrection. Congressman Matt Gaetz says it's time to stop funding Jack Smith's never-ending investigations right now. Listen to this.
You would not see this continued pattern of indictment over indictment over indictment if they thought they had neutralized Trump. Is there a single American who believes that Donald Trump would be getting indicted over these things if he were not running for president again and if he were not the leading contender for president again? And while this isn't a political show, you all can search the polling and see how President Trump is doing in the Republican field and in the general election. Again, not here to break that down. It's relevant to us insofar as it informs the decision of a weaponized government to target him, which is exactly the allegation that President Trump makes in his statement. Another important thing. The House of Representatives needs to take action to defund this special counsel investigation immediately. We do not need to wait for the appropriations process. We don't have to wait for the Holman Rule or some rider. They are attacking our democracy and engaging in election interference right now. And if the United States Congress does not have the capability to stop that election interference, well, then what is all the flowery oratory about preserving the republic?
And you can be sure, other than smearing President Trump and cheering their media buddies to do the same, the left has no intention of talking about it, not with you anyway. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre has no plans now or ever to answer a single tough question, especially when it comes to weaponizing the Department of Justice. I have an example.
Former President Trump received a letter from the special counsel that he's being investigated for his role in efforts to overturn the 2020 election. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy McCarthy says the Biden administration has decided to, quote, weaponize government to go after their number one opponent, end quote.
I'll say
weaponize government.
Here's what we have done. The president respects the Department of Justice, their independence. He has been very steadfast on making sure that the rule of law comes back in this administration, comes back in the White House, and clearly the administration more broadly, and that's what you have seen. I'm just not going to comment on this particular case.
Well, in Michigan, those that challenged the election by forming an alternate slate of electors for the Electoral College back in 2020 are now all facing decades in prison, too. You see, this is a pattern. Go after your political opponents with both barrels. By the way, Michigan's Attorney General Dana Nessel dropped these charges against 16 Michigan Republicans, accusing them of election interference. They all face up to something like 80 years in prison. Listen to this.
But we believe the evidence will demonstrate that there was no legal authority for the false electors to purport to act as duly elected presidential electors and execute the false electoral documents. Violating the law was the only avenue that remained in the desperate effort of these defendants, who we have charged with deliberately attempting to interfere with and overturn our free and fair election process, and along with it, the will of millions of Michigan voters. These defendants may have believed the now long debunked myths of vote tampering or ballot dumps. They may have felt compelled to follow the call to action from a president they held fealty to. They may have even genuinely believed that this was their patriotic duty. But none of those reasons or feelings provide legal justification to violate the law and upend our Constitution and our nation's traditions of representative government, self-determination, and a government by the people.
Actually, Madam Attorney General, according to the attorneys we've been speaking to on this network today, intent does matter in this case. If they believe they're putting together a slate of electors in the case that the election went the other way because there were going to be many, many investigations, well, there's a lot going on there. But while the Democrats are trying to put Donald Trump and his supporters on ice, there are other problems facing Joe and his team, a lot of them. Take this nauseating performance, for example, and I'm being kind here. Joe Biden caught on camera talking to a little girl, telling her how sexy she is. Seriously? What do you think about this?
Yeah. Let me whisper a secret. You're one sexy kid. Don't tell Mommy what I told you. You got it?
I'm recording.
Oh, you're recording. Not good at filming?
And that's just standard fare anymore, isn't it? Nibbling, sniffing, groping, and now suggestive comments. All the norm for this creepy 80-year-old serial, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, P-I-G, pig. It's the only word that comes to mind. This guy's disgusting. This is a guy that, according to his daughter Ashley's diary, was taking showers with her, his own kid. Well, that never should have been going on. But at this point, nothing the dirty old man seems to surprise anyone or matter to the media or to the Democrats. I guess Hunter didn't fall that far from the tree, did he? Oh, and there are other big problems with the Democrats, too, including the storm clouds of a new political party. No labels. And they're getting ready to join the fight, too. Joe Manchin still eyeing a run for president under not the Democrat banner, the no labels banner. And Democrats, honestly, are scared to death. Here's Manchin.
We're not considering anything. We're not putting anything on the table and taking anything off the table. What we're basically
You're not taking a presidential run off the table.
What we're talking about here is that no labels is something I've believed in for a long time, trying to bring people together.
And
I got involved.
They're building, if I may, though, a $70 million presidential ballot access.
There's an insurance policy that they're building in case, but if you can move the parties, I believe in America Promises. I don't believe in the promises from the two parties we have right now because they've gone so far to the left and the right.
Are you considering running for president on the no labels third party ticket?
We're not considering anything about running for any office.
Are you taking it off the table?
We're not taking anything off the table. What we're doing,
you Senator Manchin, are not taking off running as a third party candidate for president off the table.
So Vaughn, why we're here today. We're here to basically present the common sense doctrine.
Other Democrats struggling to make sense while on the world stage, demanding you and I do as we are told whilst doing nothing that they're doing themselves. In China, John Kerry, a failed presidential candidate, is now begging China to work with us on climate change. It failed, but this is just so embarrassing. How embarrassing? Well, China has no intention of being involved with all of that. That's okay. Let him speak.
China and the United States are the two most powerful economies in the world. We also happen to be the two largest emitters of greenhouse gases. And so the imperative of our two countries coming together and working and showing the rest of the world how we can cooperate and begin to address this with the urgency it requires.
Just another octogenarian licking Chinese boots. This was, of course, after Kerry praised them for their incredible efforts in renewables, failing to mention that they violate every human rights act in the book. I mean, the Uyghurs don't matter, right? Child slave labor doesn't matter to produce solar panels and Nike tennis shoes. And so it goes. Another day in the rotting swamp where great men and women were once the norm, but now it's ruled by corruption and money and, of course, ultimately power. But for me, I'll not give up. I will not give in. I will fight for this great nation and its ideals as long as I have breath in my body, and I hope you are with me. Coming up after the break, if you haven't heard of them yet, chances are you will soon. Apparently, there's a lot going on with these whistleblowers on Capitol Hill. We'll talk about that in a moment. Well, a pair of IRS whistleblowers are testifying currently on Capitol Hill. IRS Supervisory Agent Gary Shapley and IRS Special Agent Joe Ziegler. They're being questioned by Republicans and Democrats, and Gary Shapley and Joe Ziegler are acquitting themselves quite well. Listen to this.
Recommendation decisions.
Very often, criminal tax attorneys, yes.
Can you give us a percentage of how often you've said we ought to charge someone and they've said no, that may not be a good idea?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, just ballparking a vast majority of what we do, and that's why they're advisory. And
do you have respect for them?
And they're advisory.
Do you have respect for them?
Most prosecutors
It's a simple question, sir. Do you respect those colleagues or not?
Often their opinion is not respected by me
Do you respect
and prosecutors.
So do you have more respect for them or Mr. Weiss?
I don't.
I just think because you have a history of wanting to charge people and then people pushing back. By your own testimony under oath, you said about 90% of the time people are pushing back on what you want to do. And I'm not questioning. I mean, you are a stickler for the law. You know, it reminds me of Les Mis, and you know the famous person wanted to get the person who had a sandwich. I mean, and then all those times you've got people pushing back on you, and you say, well, they're not very well respected.
Yeah, well,
I mean, do you respect Mr. Weiss?
So the criminal tax attorneys, I've never had a case that they declined, that they did not concur with, that we didn't ignore their request and move forward with the. But
at 90%, they have disagreed with you, correct? By your own testimony.
Yeah. Yes, I established that. But they're.
And let me just ask you on the media. You've given testimony under oath that you have never spoken to the Washington Post, any report on this matter, correct?
That's correct.
Do you know, have you spoken to any media outlet on this matter?
I have spoken after the House Ways and Means Committee.
Before that, have you spoken to any media journalist on this matter?
Absolutely not.
Do you know of any colleague of yours at the IRS who has spoken to any journalist on this matter?
Absolutely not.
Do you know of any investigation into the leaks on this matter?
So the October 6th leak, I was the person who referred it to our Inspector General.
Do you know any of your colleagues who are under?
On December 9th of
Democrat Ro Khanna there running interference with the Democrats. They've spent a lot of their time bringing up Donald Trump's name for no apparent reason except to bring up Donald Trump's name and something that has nothing to do with him. Now, it's interesting, in the opening statements, Joe Ziegler told the committee that he is a gay Democrat. So trying to paint him as some sort of supporter of Donald Trump is simply absurd. He told the committee he just wants to do his job, and he's been prevented over and over and over again from making that happen. Gary Shapley was Ziegler's boss at the IRS. He has repeatedly told Democrats like ranking member Jamie Raskin that his comments are not supported by the facts or the evidence. Both men say IRS rules required Hunter Biden to be charged with felonies, but somehow that just didn't happen. And how much money was there? Apparently a whole hell of a lot. Listen.
Bank records so far show the Biden family, their business associates, and their companies received over $10 million from foreign nationals and related companies. A lot of this money poured in while Joe Biden was vice president. Despite creating many companies after Vice President took office, the Biden family used associates companies to receive millions of dollars from foreign companies in China, Ukraine, and Romania. After foreign companies sent money to business associates companies.
Yeah, lots of money, millions of dollars. And Shapley says everyone in the 12-person specialized team knows what happened with Hunter Biden's case and says others should come forward as well. Listen to this.
Plenty of other witnesses are familiar with these facts, in addition to those who witnessed U.S. Attorney Weiss's private admission. I encourage them to step forward and tell the truth about what happened and what they heard. Let me be clear, although these facts contradict Attorney General Garland's testimony and raise serious questions for you to investigate, I have never claimed to have evidence that Attorney General Garland knowingly lied to Congress. Whether Attorney General Garland knew his testimony was false is for you and the Inspector Generals to determine, not me. The same is true for United States Attorney Weiss's 3 letters to Congress since June 2023. It is for others to investigate and determine whether those letters contain knowingly false statements. However, it's clear that United States Attorney Weiss's story to the American public has evolved. He's gone from unequivocally echoing Attorney General Garland to just 1 month later corroborating the disclosures we made about limits on his authority. Weiss first said he can charge anywhere, and then admitted he's geographically limited. To go beyond those limits, Weiss later admitted he had to partner or get special authority. Garland said Weiss has authority. United States Attorney Weiss said he's been assured he would get authority. If he never requested or denied special authority from Attorney General Garland, as he told us on October 7, the American public deserves to hear why he allowed 2014 and 2015 D.C. charges to expire. No number of carefully worded denials or evolving half-truths can overshadow this stark fact. United States Attorney Weiss and Attorney General Garland will each be sitting before these committees one day. They will have to admit that despite all their obfuscation, the absolute fact is that this case was presented to two presidentially appointed U.S. attorneys in D.C. and California. That no charges were brought in those districts tells you everything that you need to know.
Now we're going to keep an eye on those hearings as they continue. But the Democrats keep getting slapped down by a thing that we call facts. They don't seem to like it much, but I do enjoy it a bit. Now, coming up after the break, in a huge win for free speech, a Louisiana federal court upheld the First Amendment right to speak without being censored by the government. That story and more after the break on America's Voice Live. Well, in a landmark decision that should have all Americans cheering, a Louisiana federal court recently upheld its First Amendment right to speak without being censored by the government. Judge Terry Doughty said the case Missouri v. Biden arguably involves the most massive attack against free speech in United States history. Judge Doughty issued a preliminary injunction forbidding numerous federal agencies, including the FBI, the Justice Department, and the Department of Homeland Security, as well as many individuals within the executive branch, like White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, from communicating or meeting with social media companies for the purpose of urging, encouraging, pressuring, or inducing in any manner the removal, deletion, suppression, or reduction of content containing protected free speech posted on social media platforms. The injunction bans the feds from working with outside groups to suppress and delete protected free speech, and it even prevents the government from notifying social media companies to be on the lookout, BOLO, for postings containing protected free speech. The administration has chosen to defend unconstitutional actions mirroring that of a Orwellian dystopia to censor lawful speech in the name of public health, safety, security, and don't forget the children, but only as they determine what is the truth. And that, my friends, is the road to tyranny, as you well know. More details have now emerged about private second-class Travis King, who is in North Korean custody after sprinting across the heavily fortified border willfully and without authorization. King, who had recently been released from a South Korean prison, had been escorted by the military to the international airport outside Seoul for possible further disciplinary action in the U.S., but instead of proceeding to his gate, he joined a commercial tour group headed for the joint security area. A tourist who was in King's group said the tour was nearing its end when suddenly they noticed a man running full speed toward the North Korean side. South Korean and American soldiers ordered the rest of the group inside and chased after King, but it was too late. He got away. Run, rabbit, run. King was initially reported to South Korean police after allegedly punching a Korean national at a nightclub September the 25th of last year, but was not indicted because the victim did not want to press charges. In February, he was fined $3,950 in Seoul on charges that included damaging public property, according to South Korean court records. He was accused of repeatedly kicking a police patrol car in Seoul last year, causing several $100s in damage. He did not cooperate when apprehended by officers at the scene and was shouting profanities about Koreans and the Korean Army. King's been serving in the Army since January of 2021. He was a cavalry scout assigned to the 1st Armored Division and had served almost 2 months in the South Korean prison for assault. And China's Evergrande Group posted a combined loss of $81 billion in its long overdue earnings report late on Monday. The world's most indebted property developer fell into default in 2021 and announced an offshore debt restructuring program in March, having struggled to finish projects and repay suppliers and lenders. Evergrande's net losses for 2021 and 2022 were $66.36 billion and $14.76 billion, respectively, as a result of write-downs of properties, return of lands, losses on financial assets, and financing costs, the company said. Evergrande's colossal debt pile in recent years has become the source of serious concern about China's property sector, a bedrock of the Chinese economy, with defaults and abandoned property projects seen across the country. The company's proposed restructuring is due to be heard in the High Court July 24th. J.P. Morgan estimates that around 50 property developers had defaulted on $100 billion of offshore bonds over the last 2 years, while dozens have been suspended from trading on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Coming up after the break, one class you wouldn't expect to see at a Catholic institution is one that teaches about the pros and cons of transgender medical operations on children, but it's happening at Loyola University in Chicago. We'll talk about it straight ahead on AVL. so Loyola University in Chicago, despite being a Catholic institution allegedly, has a class that teaches the pros and cons of transgender medical operations on kids. The university describes itself as a diverse community seeking God in all things and working to expand knowledge in the service of humanity through justice, learning, and faith. Here with me to discuss this story is campus reform correspondent Matthew McKenna, who is actually a student there at Loyola. Matthew, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Appreciate you being here. So it's a Catholic institution, but they're talking about the pros and cons of sex change operations on children. That just seems to me and to a lot of people to be completely out of step with this university's mission. What am I missing?
Well, I would say you're missing a lot of complicated history back to the 60s, where a lot of Catholic universities effectively pulled almost a Henry VIII from the Vatican and separated from the authority of the Vatican in terms of what they're allowed to teach and whether or not they have to abide by the teaching of the church.
Do you think that it's still so it's not a Catholic university at all, is what you're saying? It's original charter, not something it adheres to today, because based on this curriculum, it would seem that they have no relationship with the Catholic Church at all, or am I wrong?
Well, they certainly still do. There's still priests on the boards of trustees. All the presidents up until recently have been Jesuit priests. This kind of relationship exists at a lot of Catholic universities. It's a bit of a complicated situation, though, depending on the circumstance. Notre Dame, for example, there's a professor there, a theology professor, who describes it as a public school in a Catholic neighborhood. And so perhaps you could describe a lot of these Catholic universities that way, in the sense that they advertise the Catholic things about the university to try and pull students in. But then when the rubber meets the road, they're not going to necessarily hold to teaching the church about controversial social issues. Even though it's in their mission statement and it's in the university policy, practically speaking, it doesn't happen.
So what you're telling me, Matthew, is it's great for a sales pitch, but an actual application, it's not how it comes together. You're telling me that it's almost a bait and switch, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the case. And I think a lot of parents are sort of duped into thinking that their children and their young adults will be formed in the Catholic faith at many Catholic universities, when that's simply not the case. And often, so with some of these theology classes, it's destructive. One of my professors referred to the theology department at my school as like an abomination, just because of so many liberal things, gender ideology, even abortion, coming out of a Catholic theology department. And so oftentimes it's actually harmful for these young adults, let alone helpful, like these parents are expecting it to be and paying for it to be.
So where do we think you go from here? At Loyola and other Catholic universities, should they just come clean and say, look, we don't really follow Catholic doctrine, we don't really believe in any of that, and really we're kind of on the left side of the ledger when it comes to cultural issues, including transgenderism and other issues? Shouldn't they just come clean on that? I'll give you the last word.
Well, they sort of have. Unfortunately, Loyola has had drag shows, even drag shows with nuns, and they've refused. They haven't apologized for this. They support transgender housing, obviously this transgender class now, amongst an array of many other issues. But to some degree, they have come clean because John Paul II in the 80s tried to crack down on this. And universities such as even like Notre Dame, the president of the university said, quote, "What will John Paul II do if he tells the world that Notre Dame isn't Catholic? Who will believe him?" So effectively, at some of these universities, they just don't care to stand up to the authority of the Vatican and the bishops because they're still going to get the money, the endowment money, and they can move on and push their sort of secular Ivy League approach to education, and the parents are usually none the wiser.
Yeah, they're just stuck with the bill. Matthew, greatly appreciate you being here. He attends Loyola, like I said. It's tough to navigate out there some days, my friend. Thank you for taking the time. All right, so coming up after the break, Michigan's Democrat Attorney General Dana Nessel has filed felony charges against 16 Michigan residents One of those residents, a Republican and former co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party, Michonne Maddock, joining me next with an exclusive interview right here on America's Voice Live. Don't go anywhere. Michigan's Democrat Attorney General Dana Nessel has filed felony charges against 16 Michigan Republicans for their role in the alleged false electors scheme, as she puts it, following the 2020 election. One of those Republicans, the former co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party, Michonne Maddock, joining me now to figure out where we are. Michonne, thank you for being here. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
So, to be clear, what happened is 16 Republicans in the month of December following the 2020 election got together. You filled out as a slate of electors as an alternative to the Democrat slate of electors because Joe Biden was awarded Michigan's electoral votes, 16 in all. That's why there were 16 of you. That's where this all started, correct?
That's it. We were asked to be gathered together to sign paperwork, to be turned in, not to replace the Democrat electors, but just in case any of the investigations came to any kind of fruition. Most of those investigations were just being launched at the time. The election was uncertain, and so we were duly elected electors for the Trump campaign, and so we showed up when we were asked to and signed the paperwork.
And so you signed the paperwork. You say you were asked. You mentioned that a couple of times. Asked by whom? In previous conversations, you said it was attorneys that asked you to do this, and you're following the advice of attorneys. Tell me who asked you to do this, and because this is a big surprise for a lot of folks. Go ahead.
You know, a lot of it is still vague to me, and I don't have any email communications with any of these people. But Laura Cox was our state party chair at the time. Somebody from her staff contacted all of us, asked us to be at the Michigan Republican Party office at 2 p.m. I remember the time. I think it was December 18th. And so we showed up, and there was no secret meeting. They love to talk about it being in the basement. The basement happens to be the only room in the Michigan Republican Party office that's large enough to hold that many people. It's where the conference room is. So we were downstairs in the conference room, and that was it.
All right, so here it is. It says the affidavit filed by the Attorney General, Dana Nessel, reads in part, none of the 16 people who signed the document entitled Certificate of the Votes of the 2020 electors from Michigan and was sent certified mail to the National Archives and Records Administration and the United States Senate Archives were legally elected or qualified as the 2020 Michigan electors for president and vice president. She's saying you knowingly committed fraud. She's saying that you knowingly entered into a conspiracy to commit fraud and voter fraud. And I'll get into some of the specific charges, but how do you respond?
Well, it's not true. I mean, first of all, we were duly elected Trump 2020 electors. And so when our leadership says, hey, we need you to turn in documentation in case it's needed, and this is not unprecedented, this has happened many times in history, of course, we all listened and complied. 2 of the electors couldn't be there, so they sent their alternates, and everybody showed up, and we signed the paperwork that was prepared and put in front of us. Listen, Steve, I hate to say this, but the reason I wanted to talk to you is none of this matters. The truth is that Dana Nessel is working hand in hand with Jack Smith, and this is about dismantling Trump's campaign. They're literally prosecuting and jailing all of his top leaders. And in Michigan, that's me. So I feel like this is very personal. The Democrats know that they cannot beat Trump in 2024, so they have to use lawfare. That's their method, and that's what this is about. And I think people know it. I am getting such overwhelming support. I feel like this is really Dana Nessel just helping Jack and putting blood in the water. You know, the Democrats are having a field day. They feel great about it, but that's all this is. It's just a show.
So this is a performance to go after Trump supporters, MAGA Republicans, as they call them. That's your take.
Yeah, I mean, how many 80-year-olds does Dana Nessel have to imprison to prove her point about the election in 2020? Because that's the majority of these electors, which are just good Republicans doing their duty and doing what they thought they were asked to do was the right thing to do. You know, she's going to put 82-year-old Rose Rook and, 78-year-old Cliff Frost into jail for this. I don't think so. I think that this is just, Dana being Dana. She loves to do this stuff, and she loves the attention. So, one of the things I'd like to say to the public, though, when they read these stories and they feel outraged and they wonder, who's next? Maybe I should never run for office. Maybe I should stop speaking out. The truth is, you're next. These are Cold War Soviet-style tactics that are being used and deployed on the American people. And it's because they want to silence us. They want to silence opposition. They want to shut us up. And so they have to use lawfare to do it. And that's why I came up.
Put fear into people. Yeah, you put fear into people because people are afraid of losing their life savings, their job, their reputation, all of these things, Ms. Shawn, if what you're saying is true. Now, I want to give the folks a flavor, if you will, of Dana Nessel and her demeanor when she delivered this surprise news yesterday. Here's part of those comments. Listen.
We believe the evidence will demonstrate that there was no legal authority for the false electors to purport to act as duly elected presidential electors and execute the false electoral documents. Violating the law was the only avenue that remained in the desperate effort of these defendants, who we have charged with deliberately attempting to interfere with and overturn our free and fair election process, and along with it, the will of millions of Michigan voters. These defendants may have believed the now long debunked myths of vote tampering or ballot dumps. They may have felt compelled to follow the call to action from a president they held fealty to. They may have even genuinely believed that this was their patriotic duty. But none of those reasons or feelings provide legal justification to violate the law and upend our Constitution and our nation's traditions of representative government, self-determination, and a government by the people.
Now, Ms. Shawn, I want to get to the point she made there, that you had to knowingly violate the law. You didn't knowingly violate the law by your own comments here today. You said you were directed by the party chair of the state of Michigan and the attorneys. We are an alternate state. I think you referred to it at one point as a lifeboat. In case some of these lawsuits play out differently, in case Donald Trump prevails in Michigan, he did not. But if he had, you were an alternate slate of electors. That was the point, correct?
They used the word alongside. This paperwork will be turned in alongside the Democrat electors for Joe Biden in case they are needed and that its purpose was to be as a lifeboat in case they were needed. None of what we did was in secrecy. There was no oath of secrecy. We just showed up. We signed the paperwork that was put in front of us by the attorneys, and we knew that somebody was going to turn it into the archives. None of this was shrouded in secrecy. In fact, we were very public. The post that we did when we went Facebook Live on that day is still available on my Facebook page on December 18th, where we clearly explained that we are not trying to replace Democrat electors. So that was
right. Now, I want to point out one more thing here. She says that intent doesn't matter, your beliefs don't matter, none of that matters. Well, according to David Coleman, an attorney for the Great Lakes Justice Center, everything that she pointed out there in her comments, well, they do matter. Your state of mind does matter. What you believe does matter. I want to play that for you. I want you to respond to this. Go ahead.
Each of those say you have to have the specific intent to defraud or injure. Now, the last group just says defraud. But the idea is they had to specifically and knowingly sign that electoral document that was submitted to the National Archives and to the federal government, that they knew it was being done with the intent to defraud. I think that's going to be a very tough hill for the Attorney General's office to climb.
I think David is spot on there in his reading of the law, of the statute. What do you make of that?
Completely spot on. I had many people text me and call me after David's interview this morning, and he's absolutely right. I mean, I'm no attorney. Dana Nessel is supposed to be the top attorney in our state. It sounds like she has absolutely no idea what she's doing. Maybe she decided to pull all this together after a phone call with Jack Smith after a couple of Bloody Marys. I'm not sure. But I think what we all know is that this is not a criminal prosecution. This is political persecution. And that's exactly what it is. We can all see it for exactly what it is. Dana Nessel is a disaster. And I'm pretty sure that the judicial system will listen to people and leaders like David Coleman, and they will see this for exactly what it is. I mean, one of the fellow electors with me, told me afterwards she thought she was signing a sign-in sheet for the meeting. So, there was no criminal intent by any of these people, and certainly not myself, who I'm just one of 16 electors. The fact that I went on to be co-chair of the party is what they keep focusing on, but I'm just one of 16 electors that were asked to show up and turn in paperwork to be submitted alongside the Democrat electors for Joe Biden in case it was ever needed. That's it.
And alongside that now, 60 to 80 years in prison. 60 to 80 years in prison, something like that. Michonne, I'll give you the last word.
I'm being told that I'm being charged with forgery for signing my own name. It's my name. I signed it. I was there onto a sheet of paper. I don't understand how that could ever be forgery or election fraud or any of this. So it's like I said, this is not a criminal prosecution. This is political persecution.
It's a political play, you say, from the highest levels of the Department of Justice playing out on the streets of Michigan. Michonne, thank you for being here. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right, there you have it, Michonne Maddock, former co-chair of Michigan Republican Party, charged now with 8 felonies, along with 15 others also charged with 8 felonies. The total is 85 years in prison for signing an alternate slate of electors. Let that sink in. I'll be back. Well, a man in Kentucky recently found a buried cache of gold. This is part of what makes America great today. Can you imagine walking through the field? Look at this. I just want to show it to you. Coins from the Civil War, rumored to be worth millions of dollars. Look at them. All that glitters is gold, consisting of nearly 700 $1, $10, and $20 gold pieces issued by the U.S. Mint between 1840 and 1863. The discovery being called the Great Kentucky Hoard. Many wealthy Kentuckians rumored to have buried large quantities of gold and silver in advance of the Civil War, and a knowledgeable archaeologist suggests that since these gold coins were federally issued, it meant that the original owner might have been wary of being identified as a collaborator with the feds during a time when Kentucky was neutral. Maybe he went off to war and never came back. I don't know. According to the company that certified the hoard's authenticity, the rarest items are the 1863P, that's Philadelphia Mint, $20 pieces. 1 ounce gold Liberty coins, which can go for six figures at auction. There were 18 of those alone. At more than $100,000, do the math here, at 1.8. These were minted by the U.S. Treasury after gold was discovered in California and do not include the phrase "In God We Trust," which was added after the end of the Civil War. You're having a lucky day when you walk through the field and say, "Whoa, is that gold I see?" Yes. Yes, it is. All right, so let's go to the America's Voice question of the day, which is this. What should our response be concerning that soldier that ran into North Korea? Rip Hankins says, you let him go. Tim Schafer says everything's a choice. He chose badly when crossing into North Korea. Should be left to suffer the consequences of his actions. I see a theme here. David Smith, I'm sure he's a hero to leftists. Vin John Hall, he's a deserter. If he leaves North Korea, he should be arrested and tried as such. Larry Van Fleet, no response at all. Let him suffer the consequences. His choice. You see, people are like, you know what? He did this. P.D. Birchfield writes, keep him. Doug Durbin, wave bye-bye. And Charlie Duneman, continue working on those held in Russia and elsewhere. First come, first serve. He needs to wait his turn. Yeah, maybe forever, apparently. All right, good to have you here today. Great conversation here today, including that exclusive interview with Michon Maddock. You can find these and more at the Real America's Voice website, social media, and elsewhere. Drop me a line, SteveGruber.com. Tell me what you think of the program, what's going on in your world, and what might be interesting. That's SteveGruber.com. Drop me a line. Don't forget to join me first thing in the morning right here on Real America's Voice. Kick off your day every day with the Steve Gruber Show with a hot cup of coffee and some great conversation. And then join me here in the afternoon for America's Voice Live. Have a great day.
Here are some of the headlines we are featuring today from your favorite news outlets at offthepress.com. The third indictment of former President Donald